you will never be able to save enough money to buy a house because you're spending too much of your monthly income on your rent. I didn't buy a house. I invested my down payment in Bitcoin. But now we got in Bitcoin. We just want to leave it there. We don't want to touch it because it's also like security for us. Like we're taking our power back. We're taking our freedom back. We're taking our security back. That's the game. That's the game. I mean, right now, it is never going to be at the price levels that it's out at. I mean, it is, once it goes, it's gone. I'm using this technology to do that for myself and my own family. Why wouldn't I want to bring that to state level, protect the state that I love, and to protect us from what's becoming out of control government, regardless of who's in leadership.
You're listening to the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast with Trey Walsh. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Progressive Bitcoiner. It's been a minute since I've spoken to you all, our faithful listeners, who it's been a while that I've hosted this podcast, and to our new listeners as well who have stumbled upon our show or been interested in this episode in particular, welcome. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you all. And before I let you all get into this conversation with Ian, I want to do a bit of housekeeping, including telling you a little bit more about Ian and our work here at the Progressive Bitcoiner as well. So Ian Calderon is a former California State Assembly member and the youngest majority leader in state history. During his 8 years in office, he focused on strengthening California's economy and fostering innovation, including helping establish the state's blockchain working group. After leaving the legislature to focus on family and business, he is now running for governor of California. And now I also want to add that the Progressive Bitcoiner is a 501c3 nonprofit. So as such, we do not endorse candidates or parties. We lead with our values and mission to promote Bitcoin education and focus on Bitcoin for social good and adjacent topics relevant to current events today, like this conversation, including the realm of society and politics. So I really invited Ian on to discuss policy ideas on affordability and his thoughts around Bitcoin and innovation going forward, especially from his perspective as a young Democrat running for office who is also pro-Bitcoin. And that is something that's severely missing and lacking, we've noticed, from the left in general. One of the reasons that our organization exists is to promote good Bitcoin education and research, focusing on progressive values that might appeal to those on the left. So I hope you all enjoy this conversation with Ian. And I also want to add, because we are a nonprofit, whatever donation you can make to us, whether it's small or large, really goes a long way to support our mission here, promoting good quality Bitcoin education and media and grant funding as well to social good causes and research. So you will find that in the show notes to be able to donate to us at our website, progressivebitcoiner.org. You can donate in Bitcoin or credit card. And again, any donation, large or small, goes a long way to fund our efforts here, including this show. And we want to make more episodes of this show and get out more content far and wide from our particular focus on Bitcoin for social good, Bitcoin for financial inclusion, empowerment, and progressive values. So thank you all for your support. Thank you all for listening. Ian, thanks so much for coming on the show today, and welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner. How are you?
I'm well, Trey. How you doing, man? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Congrats on the announcement and the run for governor in California. I gave our listeners a little bit of a intro to who you are, as maybe many folks in our listeners, as I was just telling you, a lot of folks that listen to our show might not be as connected into the political realm as maybe, unfortunately, I am at some times, and what we're trying to break through and out of. So, besides kind of your intro and bio that I told to people, I'd love to kick off the conversation just by hearing a little bit more about you and why you've decided to jump into the governor race at this time in California.
Yeah, no. So, going back to the early days before politics, I was a surfer. I competed, I had sponsors and the whole thing. I traveled a lot, competed a lot. And, I came to this realization that, Kelly Slater, Rob Machado, Andy Irons, they're really the only guys, Shane Dorian, making any money surfing. And so I should probably go to college and, save myself the heartache of not being able to get on the world tour and support myself as a professional surfer. So I went to Long Beach State, studied political science, minor in communication, and then I left and I worked for Hurley because Hurley International was my sponsor. So I did retail marketing for them in LA and Inland Empire territory. And then I had fun doing that, but I just didn't feel like, working sales and doing that kind of work was what I felt like I was meant to do. And so I ended up working for the assembly under an assembly member, and I was a constituent caseworker. And so basically what that meant is, you all have representatives, state representatives, and, if you have an issue that you're trying to solve, that's a state level issue, you can call your member's office, assembly member, senator, and you're going to get a staff member that does constituent casework. And for this assembly member, that was me. And I got this call from his mom single mom who, we're coming, this is like 2010, we're coming out of a big recession, and people are still rebounding. She had just got laid off, and she kept trying to get her unemployment benefits through EDD, but she couldn't. Every time she'd spend like 2-3 hours on the phone waiting on hold and then get hung up on. So it's just like a couple of month long process for her to try to get a hold of anybody. She couldn't get a hold of anybody. So my first real experience is helping her. And so we have liaisons that we work with in these state agencies. And so I called our liaison, and in about a week was able to start getting her benefits. And she called me after and was just like, I can't tell you how much this means for me. I'm a single mom. This is food on the table for my kids. I don't want to be on government assistance. I don't want help. I don't want this. And I'm going to get a job and get off this as soon as I can. But this is a huge deal maker, like difference maker for me in my life right now. It's a big deal. And so thank you for doing this. This meant a lot. That feeling of knowing that you've done something to help somebody else other than yourself, man, that's just, that was it for me. I decided I was going to run for the assembly. I started my campaign when I was 25. I got elected just turning 27. After just turning 27, I was the first of my generation. I'm a millennial. So I was the first millennial ever elected to the state legislature. And then in 2016, became the youngest majority leader in the history of the state. I served for a little over 8 years, and it was amazing. I loved it. And I loved the work that I did, the issues that I got to work on. I was the first to do any blockchain legislation in the state of California, first to do any digital asset legislation, first to do any AI legislation. But ultimately, because I was young, all my major life milestones happened when I was in the legislature. So I got engaged, got married, had my first kid, second kid, my third kid. I have 4 kids. My kids are 8, 6, 5, and 4. And, as much as I loved what I did and I didn't want to leave, I wanted to be a dad more. And so I left. And I've been with my family, living in the same world everybody else has been living in, separate of politics for the last 5 years. I'm a business owner, doing state and local government affairs for clients. And I've been enjoying it. I've been enjoying being with my family and raising my kids. But the reason why I left the legislature was for my kids and being with my family. Now I feel like that's the thing that's pulling me back into running for governor, is I want to know that my kids have a future in this state. And I seriously doubt that at this point. And, I don't want my kids, just like so many other families across the state and so many people, eventually coming to this conclusion of, as much as I love California and I want to be there, it's too expensive and it's just not for me. And I'm gonna have to move this out of this state in order to, buy a house, start a family, and begin our lives.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here I'm in Massachusetts, and I think there's a lot of listeners to our show, and maybe some new ones now, that obviously this comes up in political cycles, but just top of mind for everyone is just affordability. Since the Great Recession, since COVID, things just keep getting worse for millennials like us and people coming in and future generations. And I think that's something that we try to tap into at the Progressive Bitcoiner is, we're not a organization or a podcast that's here to say Bitcoin will fix the world or this thing. You say that to someone who's never heard of something like Bitcoin, or they think that it's a fake internet money, automatically going to roll their eyes, right? But what we try to do is say that Bitcoin is a tool. It is something that helps you preserve your savings. It's something that helps in so many different ways. You talk about technology, innovation, all of these things. It is one tool, but also it opens up further conversations about what is wrong with our financial system, why are our politics broken, all of these things that we kind of tangentially have conversations about in this way. So right now, with you running for governor in California, what do you see as the top issues facing constituents? You said you started your career in politics in constituent services, right? So I'd like to think that's probably a part of your constant focus in this work. But what are some of the issues around affordability that have caused you to do something that, people have joked with me, like, you should run in politics? And I'm like, hell no. So you were in it, you left, and then you're like, I'm crazy enough to go back in.
Go on, man. Let's
time.
Go. Yeah, let's do it.
So
let's start a movement.
So obviously you kind of mentioned like you're thinking of your family and future generations. And I feel that sense of urgency alongside you in terms of what does our country look like for everyday people, not the top earner, the top 1% or the top 10% in terms of affordability. So what are some of those issues facing Californians, and what are some of your, broad approaches, obviously without getting into too many nuts and bolts? I'm sure you could talk for hours and days around that and resources around that to do so. But what are some of the things you see that facing Californians right now that you're hoping to chip away at?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that motivation really is around just like a lack of common sense in government in general. I mean, back in 2017, when I started working, I created the blockchain working group because my assessment was, here's a technology that can help us deliver more effective and efficient services to constituents. Why wouldn't we utilize this? Why wouldn't we take advantage of this? You can't talk about being the tech capital of the world and not actually use technology to improve the way that government delivers services. And we had a great year of meetings with all different stakeholders and delivered the report to the legislature and the governor's office. And it was successful, but we're screaming at the top of our lungs, institute, blockchain technology to solve for, at least payments. And then COVID hits and we faced $20+ billion in fraud because people were getting money that they shouldn't have gotten. Well, if you had instituted blockchain technology, we would have been able to mitigate that. And so, you have that along with the fact that we've told Californians and generations of Californians, well, homeownership's not for you. So we're going to focus on this idea of affordability around housing. But that affordability isn't going to be actually trying to get you in a position to buy a house and own a home and create your own generational wealth. It's just to find you a partner that you can afford, that's a quote unquote affordable, but you're spending 50+% of your monthly income every month on that rent. So you'll never get out of that. It's indentured servitude. You will never be able to save enough money to buy a house because you're spending too much of your monthly income on your rent. And so the top 3 issues for me is homeownership and a pathway to homeownership, because that shouldn't be off the table. Affordability for all the reasons, for common sense as to why we need to make things more affordable. And then it's good government. It's really hard right now to underscore or not properly be able to articulate how much trust people have in government. Government constantly making promises. We're going to make your life better, and we're going to pass these laws and these bills, and we're going to do the press release, and we're going to do the social media post and take these victory laps. And then there's just no follow through. And it's just, there's no follow through to make sure that law actually worked or that new policy or investment actually did what it was intended to do. And you're right. What I saw in my last 5 years being out of the legislature, every single year getting harder. It gets more expensive. Home ownership drops. I think the average, 55% of Californians are actually homeowners. We're going to drop below 50% in the next couple of years. And think about it, that's insane. 1 in 5 homes that are owned in this state are owned by institutional or foreign investors, 20%, and that drives up the cost. And there's there's nobody paying attention. I mean, I tried to do legislation on that in 2016. I couldn't get the legislature and the governor to agree that we should at least track those investments and how it's impacting first-time home buyers. So, we got to create the path to homeownership. You build single-family homes. We've really made it difficult to do that in this state. So build single-family homes, protect single-family home zoning, provide incentives for renters to save, tax benefits to be a first-time home buyer and a homeowner in this state that you can take more of a tax advantage of. And, at the end, you pay for all that by charging a surcharge to institutional and foreign investors, along with an annual fee to own homes in this state to be able to cover that. So it's budget revenue neutral. And so, that's going to, housing, you have to understand in California is tied to poverty. It's tied to homelessness. It's tied to affordability. It's tied to generational wealth creation. So housing is really the linchpin for a lot of these big issues. Yeah, that goes into affordability, but also affordability is going to come by just really strategically and smartly working through duplicative, unnecessary regulations where the state just in an unnecessary way stands in the way of whether it's development, business operations, makes it difficult to do business in the state for a small business. And so what you face is a lack of competition, and that lack of competition drives up costs. And so we need to create more competition by the state getting out of the way a little bit more and allowing these businesses to kind of start, thrive, and giving them the kind of freedom to do that. And then good government is important because, if you're not delivering effective and cost-efficient services, then what are you doing? That's your job as government. And we can use technology. We have it all in our backyard. This shouldn't be hard to work with them, find private sector solutions to our public sector challenges. And we can do that. And we're just not doing it. And I think it's a shame that we're not.
Yeah. And I think there's so many things that you said, but one thing I want to focus our conversation a lot on that I actually tweeted about and tagged you in it as well is, I think what we're facing today, whether it's with with voters or people in general, right? That there's less of a, Democrat, Republican, like it's more of a people are flocking to the candidates they align with, or they're flocking to what that point you said, where people are not trusting government, they're not trusting government services. So kind of from a progressive value standpoint, of kind of a progressive left, and these words are always changing and evolving, right? Sometimes now it's kind of like far left, progressive, center, all of that, but just kind of left of center, right? A lot of times the Democrats, folks on the left, have kind of relied on or leaned into government good. And a lot of folks these days from both sides, right, are not feeling that at all. So I'm curious your take and folks in California, Ro Khanna is also kind of a very good leader in the, Bitcoin digital asset space in terms of just talking about technology. So just in terms of the general conversation and vibe, because a lot of what we focus on at the Progressive Bitcoiner is just the state of affairs and conversation with how people talk about things like Bitcoin and how things in this country become so partisan when they should not. And it's also any new technological advancement. I mean, it's so funny, like old cartoons of electricity and how many people were against that and saying everyone's going to die, everyone's going to be killed, we can't have that, and against the car and all of these different things. And a lot of his view, like Bitcoin and other technologies, is similar to that. But the conversation with folks on the left, almost it's so partisan on one hand, but it's almost like, well, something like Bitcoin is not a government solution. So therefore, we are against it. So is there a place for folks on the left, or like a lot of what you're saying and, kind of the abundance camp, if you will, that sort of stuff is trying to tie back more into the private solutions, making government work, things like that, that's okay to talk about. But a lot of folks on the left and Democrats are so opposed to that while also being against the current administration that is government. So it's all just so confusing. And I'm trying to wrap my head around how do we move forward and just focus on, let's see what actually works. Let's see what solutions actually work. For instance, if people held Bitcoin over the past 10 years to save money instead of dollars, dealing with such crazy inflation and especially COVID, that floor that jumped like 20% and is not going back down. It just goes slower after that point. That's a good thing, right? So how do we, my long-winded rant here is, how do we infuse some of this conversation back into the left and be really solutions oriented rather than, well, that's not the way we're supposed to do things. That's a private solution, or Bitcoin is this private, scary, like money thing, when really it's like, well, people can just, buy, there's a million different ways to buy Bitcoin, to hold it, send remittance payments, have good savings, all of this stuff. How do we get back to that as folks on the left?
Yeah. So I really think that's old guard thinking. And that's why you're seeing this movement across the country, and you're going to see it happening here in California, where you've got the next generation that's saying, it's time for us. It's time for you to pass the torch, allow us to step up, take control, and step up into these leadership positions, because, we've continued to suffer through, the same old solutions being continually put forward to solve these challenges, and they've never solved the challenge. They've just kicked the can down the road. So you're going to have to be creative and innovative in order to do that. And you're just not going to do it if you're tied to and just entrenched in this existing political system that has created some of these issues. I mean, it's wild too, and I know you know this, and you're gonna, this probably resonate with you when I say this. But I remember when Eminem, jumped out onto the scene, and politicians positioning around that, and what was happening? What was happening is you had Democrats that were, defending him and his ability to, to express themselves as an artist and art form. And it was Republicans, under the Bush administration and, that were constantly coming after him, saying that what he's saying is, it poisoning the minds of the youth and causing them to commit crimes and, and all this like crazy shit. And what's crazy is Democrats were always the party that embraced innovation, that embraced change, that embraced, like these new ways of thinking and doing things. And that's why tech has always been more liberal, and innovation has always kind of centered around these more liberal and progressive hubs in the country, and areas in the country, because we always embrace that. And like all of a sudden, especially when you look at Bitcoin and in digital assets, it's flipped. And that's wild to me because I haven't changed. I still embrace technology and innovation and figure out like, how can we use technology to improve people's lives? And so, I feel like what you're seeing with the next generation, I don't know if you saw, Dennis Porter had actually tweeted something recently that talked about, the breakdown, like political breakdown of a lot of people that are in the digital asset space and how the majority of them are lean more liberal than they do conservative, but will still vote for Trump because they're single issue voters and, they want to support somebody that supports them. Well, I said this back when I was working on this policy when I was in the legislature. I'm like, guys, the majority of the people that are actually searching online and Googling this stuff, they're Democrats from California. So these are our people. I don't understand what's hard to understand about this. And so I feel like you're going to see this new generation that is going to start to push really hard to say it's our time. You pass the torch. And I don't think it's going to change unless it is this new generation that's stepping up and then asserting ourselves and saying it's our time to step into these leadership roles. I mean, I have friends that I served with in the legislature that are now in Congress, and one of them from LA, he's like, I got this guy who's challenging me from my left, and he's hitting me on being supportive of Bitcoin. And I was just kind of like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Constituents, voters, they want to know that you're going to be able to interact with this industry and create responsible regulatory frameworks, so that people can have access to it and still feel safe. And he's like, yeah, I don't get it. It seems like a really silly thing to try to hit me on. And so it is changing, and the perspective is changing. The perception is changing. A lot of the people that I talk to that are involved in this industry, even from an institutional standpoint, they still talk about it being bipartisan and not being partisan. Yeah, Trump embraced it, and then there's going to be benefits to the Republicans for that. But to say that it's over and to say that there's no hope or to say that there isn't going to be a pivot from the Democrats is inaccurate and incorrect, because there will be. You can already see it. It's already happening. And this next generation wants to know that they're going to have access to this technology. They want to know that leaders are going to responsibly legislate, not to squash and kill, but to just allow it to be safe. I mean, I didn't buy a house. I invested my down payment in Bitcoin, because I couldn't save enough in order to actually afford the down payment of my house. It's just like especially after COVID, like it almost seemed like it was like 20% a year. It was just going up. And I couldn't save fast enough. So my wife and I, we were just sitting on the couch after we had just put our kids to bed, and we're just like, we got to put our money in something that's just going to allow us to keep up with just inflation and the rising price of homes if we ever want to own a home. So that's what we did. We put it in Bitcoin. But now we got in Bitcoin, we just want to leave it there. We don't want to touch it because it's also like security for us. Look at politics, look at government. I want to know that I have something I can use to protect myself, protect my, protect the value of my investment, grow over time, but then also have access to if, our politics continue to go down this kind of scary path where we're just, we've got military on our streets and out of control, unaccountable government. And that can happen on either side. So I feel like it's a protection for me now and my family. And like, that is very important to us.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now. Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. And I think if anyone's new to this conversation or kind of sees a clip from you and is new to Bitcoin, that's one of the best ways to talk about Bitcoin, in my opinion, is, the more it kind of stays around, we kind of got past probably when you were first getting into it. Those were the days of like, well, it died again, those days. And then you get into 2021 and it gets crazy with kind of all sorts of cryptos and rug pulls and everything. And then, well, Bitcoin's still around. And now it's well over $100,000 when it was like 1 penny on someone's computer running CPU mining over a decade ago, right? And if it goes down $5,000, people are like, it's crashing. And it's like, it's crashing above $100,000. Do you hear what you're saying about this, this asset? It's so funny, right? And, one thing we advocate for all the time is not something to trade. It's not something to gamble with, in my opinion. It is a savings tool. It is literally a savings tool that you can just not have your future robbed from you. And it is that sense of security. And that's one of the great ways we like to talk about it on this show. And in general, that's just the US. Now imagine if you're globally and your currency is debased 40% overnight by your government, right? And I'm not one of those people that will fearmonger and say that will happen here, right? But we're already seeing higher levels of inflation. We're already seeing homes. I think I saw a statistic that was on average, it's like 4.1 times the median income, whereas it used to be double, right? Maybe double, maybe late 80s, early 90s, when a lot of our parents were well into their home and raising their families, right? So talking about Bitcoin in a way of like preserving your savings. So to go from that, and then to have people say, I'm going to attack a candidate because they support Bitcoin, because they associate it with a political party is nonsense when Bitcoin is an open protocol. Just like someone wouldn't attack the internet. You might attack someone's website or an individual, but you're not going to attack the internet and say, shut down the internet, right? That's kind of where we're at with Bitcoin.
But I mean, you had those voices.
Oh, for sure. We got
that
past
existed. That. But again, there's an inevitability of Bitcoin now. Like, it's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to exist. And so like, we're really beyond that point. We've made it past that point. Now it's just, okay, how do we open it up, get more retail to feel confident and comfortable getting involved and engaging in it? And how can we use it to just make government more, more effective and grow our, revenue so that we can benefit from. I mean, when 2019, like we suffered from wildfires in California. And when I was there in 2019, we passed a wildfire relief fund, which, both utilities and the state put money into this fund to be able to help kind of make communities and people whole again after there's this major wildfire. And there's like $22 billion out there right now. Well, and this would have been a difficult decision to make at the time. And I'm not saying that we would have had the courage to do that. But if we had put that money into Bitcoin in 2019, today, the wildfire relief fund in California would be worth over $216 billion. $216 billion. We had just done half. That's $108 billion that it would be worth today. Well, we did nothing, and so it stayed at $22 billion. And that's a big reason why insurers are pulling out of the state, and the cost of home insurance continues to go up. And we can't get communities built really fast because insurers, they're not going to take that on. Like, they're not going to take on those costs because it's too significant for them and too much of a risk. So they pull out of California, and then that raises everybody else's costs. And then we've got this thing in California called the FAIR Plan, just kind of like the insurer of last resort. So now you've got everybody on this FAIR Plan. There's not nearly enough insurance that can really take care of anything. And so if we had just made that investment back then and had the courage to do it, we would have a fund that would be able to take care of our wildfires in a way that, kept insurers here, allowed us to make communities whole and people whole really fast. And that's the way we need to start thinking through solutions, at least from my perspective in a state like California, this is how we can do it. How do we invest our rainy day fund, which is our emergency money, in something like Bitcoin? I mean, CalSTRS, our retirement, they at least for the teachers, they have exposure now to MicroStrategy. And, they're exposed to Bitcoin now. So like, there is this growing comfortability within government. And so for me, it's, why would we say no? And why would we not keep these options on the table, especially if we could significantly improve how we deliver services and we can improve people's lives to do it?
What do you think well, first of all, before we go on that, because you were kind of touching on it, I know one of your maybe campaign promises, I don't want, these kind of catchphrasey words, but one of the things you said you'd be interested in doing, and obviously there are a lot of pieces to this, and there's already things in the works in California and many other states, is how state governments, and again, me being a politics and government nerd, state governments work very differently than something like the Federal Reserve or the Treasury. Like, state governments really work on a balanced budget. You can take some debt here and there, you can carry forward rainy day funds, all of that, but it's very different than you don't have access to printing more money or increasing debt to the level that the federal government has. So states really try to run a balanced budget, as many households do. Right, yeah. Right. You have to, and it spells real trouble for people when that doesn't happen. So one of the things that you'd like to put forward or work on with California, with the state house, with the federal government, whoever would be interested in this proposal, is adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet of California. So you were kind of already talking about what that could do for wildfire funds, but can you talk a little bit more about that for people? Like, what would that look like, and what would be some of the main reasons you'd want to advocate for that?
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at the performance, I mean, look, what's the general rule? If you're able to hold on for 4 years, you're going to make money in Bitcoin. Yeah. As long as you're willing to have that time horizon. I mean, like, California is already being beat out by these other states like Colorado. They accept payments in Bitcoin and crypto when we don't. we could easily start doing that and hold on to it and allow that to grow on our balance sheet and, use that, that growth and those savings, or not savings, but the growth of that savings to benefit and fund other programs. And, it'll be an arduous process, and I'd have to work with the legislature, get them confident and comfortable with doing it. But when I take a look holistically at the different challenges, we always need more money. And now what position are we in? Well, we got 2 budget cycles where we're going to face $10+ billion deficits. So, and this is $10 to $20 billion deficits that we're talking about here for the next 2 budget cycles. Now we've got this fight with the federal government where, we're this administration that I'm not saying that there's not, I understand why, but we're the administration's punching bag. And what if they decide, if they continue to, control houses and the presidency and Congress, that they don't just dry up some funds? I mean, we're a giver state. We give far more money to the federal government than we get back. But I wouldn't put it past the current leadership to withhold some of those funds and make that difficult for states like California. So, when I talk about putting Bitcoin on California's balance sheet, what I'm talking about is how can we get to the point where we're self-sufficient and we don't have to rely on even the federal government, because we've built up enough revenue with investments in the right type of programs that, yield a strong ROI or some kind of an ROI, where we've generated the same amount of revenue that we would get otherwise from the federal government. That way we don't have to be dependent or owe anybody anything. And I mean, that's how I've always been in my life and with my family. I don't like asking for things. Like, I really don't. And that's why campaigning kind of sucks for me, because it's like, you got to call people, you got to ask for money, you got to do all this stuff. And I don't love self-promotion, and I don't love asking for things. I like to be in the position to just do the job and not have to tell everybody about it. And then, be able to bring about whatever the positive outcome of those policies or decisions are. But that's what I'm talking about. And I feel like Bitcoin, for me, the way it is for me and my family, which is this security and this way to protect my family, that's my number one job, being a husband and being a dad. That's the thing I care most about in this world. And so if I'm using this technology to do that for myself and my own family, why wouldn't I want to bring that to the state level, protect the state that I love, and to protect us from what's becoming out of control government, regardless of who's in leadership. And so for me, I want to know that no matter what, our state is taken care of. And if Bitcoin can help us get there, which I do believe can, then I'm all in, and I will have the conversations that I need to have to try to put us in the position where we can get this, grow the amount that we're holding on our balance sheet. And again, and if we can do it before other sovereign nations do it, I mean, that's the game. That's the game. I mean, right now, it is never going to be at the price levels that it's out at. I mean, it is, once it goes, it's gone. And there's going to be hyper Bitcoinization. The price is going to skyrocket. It's going to become, like, you're going to see the real estate, all these other assets are going to be liquidated, put into Bitcoin for all the different reasons that we've been talking about. And if California can, because it should, get in before all of that happens, think about the position that this state is going to be in. And we're all going to look like geniuses because we saw it when nobody else did. And I'm just tired of California being behind the curve. It's time for us to step out, be a leader again. And this is a great way that we can show that kind of leadership.
Yeah, I think you're setting a good example by talking about this. I think of, I was in DC this past June for the Bitcoin Policy Summit, and we were meeting with some lawmakers, and we try to do education with really any lawmakers, but particularly the kind of progressive and Democrat side, because there's such a gap of education. Sure, there's some kind of understanding and education of crypto in general. We focus specifically on Bitcoin, and obviously we understand that a lot of market structure and crypto conversations have to happen kind of across the basis. But like you said, there's a lot of people kind of coming to the table at this point. But there are a lot of people that would hear what you're saying and saying there'd be a soundbite, or unfortunately, this I'm afraid it might happen. Unfortunately, it will probably happen more and more at some point in your campaign, where there's clipped on CNN or MSNBC or somewhere else of like, this Ian guy wants to take risky crypto and bankrupt California, right? When what you're talking about is this, almost in a way, this rainy day fund to preserve the value of you being able to have what I like to call resistance money, right? Like, it's so funny that so many people, progressives and folks on the left, talk about resisting the Trump administration or resisting things. Well, Bitcoin is that ultimate resistance, right? When you hold it, when you have it in self-custody for your family, when you have it in your state treasury and you hold it long enough, you can do some of the things and say no to some things and say yes to other things. And that's so incredibly powerful. And that is not risky. So our kind of risk assessment and kind of your business side of things as well, the risk assessment is totally off. And it's not even genius saying these things. It's very common sense, but people are so blinded that, maybe 2 years from now, maybe it takes another decade, I'm not sure. We'll say that was kind of the simplest thing that we could have done is invest in that. So I'm still just flabbergasted that some people will see the show or hear you talk about these things even in the future, whether they're Democratic strategists, whether they're other politicians, whether they want to attack you or your colleagues in Los Angeles and other things like that. When you're saying we're just trying to protect this state I love, this is what it's done for my family. I know I shouldn't be surprised because it's politics in the US, but I still am so surprised after being in the space since 2021, less time than you, but just constantly hitting that wall and seeing people get hung up on something that is safety and security and resistance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want anybody to tell me, I don't want to hear anybody tell me, well, like, oh, well, there's crime or, they're like, well, okay, well, there's more crime, that is committed every single day using the dollar than using, Bitcoin. And by the way, it's a transparent ledger where you can see it. It's actually not a strong and good medium for people to commit crimes, financial crimes. I mean, because eventually, when we look at all the major, fraud that's happened in this space, eventually they've gotten caught using, the transparency of the blockchain. So, but also a lot of those arguments are being used and perpetrated by this old guard and this existing class of leadership that our generation is finally saying, it's enough. Thank you so much for your service. We have the utmost respect, but just like we backed you, it's time for you to back us and to back our ideas because we have good ideas and we have a different perspective. We've grown up in a different world. We're of a different generation and we think that we're going to have the ideas that are going to be a little bit more relevant now to solving the challenges today, just because our worlds are just so much bigger, or our perspectives of solutions are it's broader. And that's why I'm running. That's why I'm passionate. And again, I want to know that people that are in the state, including my kids, have a future here. And unless we start thinking outside the box and implementing these types of policies and these types of solutions, it's not going to happen. And that's unfortunate for a state like California and the people living in it to have to contemplate.
Yeah. How do you, because what I hear you saying a lot and what I try to hone in on is this kind of progressive left value take of what you're talking about. Because you're talking about, I believe in good government that can care for people. You're talking about affordability. You're talking about things that resonate with these kind of progressive values. But what we're seeing from the left, at least in my experience, in places like the coasts, right, for sure, is more of a bent to be against things like Bitcoin, almost in a weird way, where like we've gotten past some, FUD and misinformation around the environmental concerns. I think there's been a lot more data around Bitcoin mining and things that they're pursuing cheaper energy, which is renewable, compared to the banking industry and other fossil fuel agencies. It's kind of like you were talking about kind of fraud and illicit activity. There's more happening through traditional rails than something like Bitcoin, right? So we're getting past some of that. But whether it's the Trump administration, whether it is this belief that, well, if someone else holds Bitcoin and they can get rich from that, that's just bad for people that also are working class and have held it, right? So how do you, obviously you're running for governor of California, but you're also going to be a leader in this space and kind of already are from the Democratic side. So how would you talk to, whether it's someone listening to this show, whether it's a progressive politician that says, oh, we cannot support any of that, or that is a Trump crime wave fest. How do you talk to folks that are in that camp that it's almost like it feels like the last hurrah from right before we actually break out into Bitcoin as this nonpartisan, yeah, of course, kind of Bitcoin's everywhere and everything type thing, whether people know it or not. How would you approach people like that in this world of partisan politics and in this world of people just do not know a lot of information about it still? It's one of the things we try to do, and even through this conversation here. So what would you say to folks like that? Because I think that's going to come up, obviously, as you're on the campaign trail, but also as you have these conversations as an emerging leader in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, you've been in progressive politics for a long time. How often have you heard progressives talk about the politics of fear? and how that's a vehicle of the right. And the right, talks about the things that you should and try to scare you into voting for them. So our strategy and our answer to that is politics of fear around digital assets like Bitcoin. I mean, it's out of control. It doesn't make any sense, and it's just not true. And what you're taking as your lack of understanding of a technology of digital assets, and you're conflating that to being dangerous or something bad when you just don't understand it. And so take the time to understand it. And I get it; it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. And I sympathize with folks and maybe not feeling like they have the time because they're being pressured from every other issue that they're dealing with by being an elected official. But it's we're not going to solve our challenges by just closing ourselves off to different solutions. And this is our potential solutions. And this is 100% something that should be involved in the conversation. But I don't have a lot of concern, especially if I were to become governor, that I'm going to have to spend a lot of time trying to talk and dance around these conversations with my progressive colleagues that are in the legislature about not being open to this. I think that they will be open to this, and also at the same time, my hope too is that if I'm running for governor and I can be successful, well, that creates a permission structure. For a lot of Democrats and progressive leaders that are not just in office but running for office to feel more confident and comfortable talking about this and embracing it. Because this guy didn't hide from it, and he got elected governor of California and mounted a successful campaign talking about these issues and leaning into it, not running away from it. So I can do that too, or maybe there's something that I miss and I should look into this. And so, you don't get changed. We are creatures of habit. Change is hard for us, and I get that, but somebody's got to break the mold. Somebody's got to be able to talk openly and freely about this. And it's, and they're going to see that there's a whole big world that's very receptive to us, very receptive, a whole big world, very receptive to listening to, us and about our concerns, giving us the information we need to work through those types of concerns. And then at the end of the day, this is the beauty of government, is that I look at government as a referee. They're not supposed to keep us from being able to live our lives and feel less free, whether it's, freedom of consumption in more urban areas and more rural areas, freedom of just being able to live my life free of the government coming in, telling me what to do 24/7. We can have all of these, we can live in all of these, we can have all of that. We just need to be able to, not be afraid of change. And as long as we're not afraid of change and we're willing to embrace different thoughts and ideas and solutions, that's how we're going to move forward. And I feel like, and again, from my experience, conversations that I've been having over the last year or so, I feel like the pendulum really is swinging.
Yeah, I feel that too, especially behind the scenes. Again, when we were in DC, there were some offices that said to me, listen, the Trump thing is a thing, but we'll get past it. And then, bada. But my big thing was but we got to do stuff between now and then. We can't just have... Some folks are saying, well, that's going to be a Republican issue, or that, and then the Democrats have this issue, right? And it's this is something that it's not going to just be well, wait until this person is no longer in office and then we'll do something about it, right? Because then it's too late. And clearly, you've talked about some of the voter data. Clearly, there was some effect that not the Biden administration taking some of the stances they had towards crypto, towards the crypto industry, all of these things, probably cost some voters. Some would argue maybe the election, right? Or at least the posturing of, we know better than you on XYZ, the economy's fine, all this stuff is fine. And and crypto's bad. Everything that people were trying to do to help themselves, to preserve their wealth, to be entrepreneurial, to do all these things, it was shit on. And then, the election went the way it did. So I'm right there with you. I feel like that tide is turning. Unfortunately, some of the loudest voices are still very influential to everyday people. And my bigger focus and concern above certain crypto legislation, how rules are made and this and that, and all the kind of technicalities of some things beyond.
You're in Massachusetts. You've got Elizabeth Warren, and I know that's
100%. Yeah. And we met with their office as well. And I think there's a lot of concerns, valid concerns that people have around, especially on the progressive side, especially from Warren's side, around consumer protections, around a lot of the fraud and abuse that does happen, that is illegal criminal activity, that you should go after the illegal criminal activity, not go after like an open protocol that has nothing to do with XYZ.
But did she ever say that that's Bitcoin, or just, that's more the tokenized meme coins?
Yeah. So the word will just be crypto, right? That will be kind of it. So again,
Did they not recognize that there is a difference and that they're not the same?
Many are. I think many of the staffers are, many of the government officials are. I think market structure legislation that we'll see is obviously saying things like, Gary Gensler, who a lot of people in the crypto space call the boogeyman, right? Said incredibly early on that Bitcoin is commodity, right?
Yeah.
And we'll kind of figure out these other things. So I think the people that know we're going to lead on these things, they do know. The rest is politics to me. And I think that's what frustrates me is the right and the left both do it with different issues, the politics of fear, right? So, and some people on the left will do the politics of fear around crypto. They'll lump it all together. I saw this as well recently, which I'd love to get your take on. I'm a regular listener of Pod Save America and Pod Save the World, and I listen to a variety of different political commentary. And right there in your state of California, in Pod Save the World, they were talking about CZ and the Binance leader's pardon recently from Trump, and people can have various opinions on should that have been the punishment he received, should he have been pardoned, what about the quid pro quo after the fact, all of that, right? But then the conversation delved into, from Ben Rhodes, a former Obama security staffer and kind of leader in that administration, it kind of delved into, well, this is the problem with crypto and establishing something that's separate from the government and creating money and the systemic risk. It just like after that about technology in general. When this centered around a president's actions of an individual of a company, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, so the politicization of it from certain people who, you see this on the right in different ways, but from Elizabeth Warren and others, they aren't going to be the leaders on this crypto legislation, right? They're kind of a voice that's not influential to a lot of those people when making that legislation, to a lot of these government officials, to what will eventually get passed, right? A few years ago, she had said, we're building an anti-crypto army, right? And that didn't work out. So again, it's kind of these resistance periphery voices, like it was in the Republican Party. Quite honestly, Donald Trump really hated Bitcoin his first term and spoke out against it, right? It's just for illicit, I like the dollar. I don't like Bitcoin or crypto, right? So I think the people, like you said, there's a lot of people doing really good work on this that want to focus on like safe and responsible use and access, but want to also focus on like, yeah, people should be able to like self-custody their Bitcoin just like they can hold cash in their wallet. They shouldn't have to rely on XYZ company. We don't need to know, have it be completely and no privacy allowed when using your money, right? Some of these things that we focus on. So, back to your point, I think a lot of people are doing good work, but there's still, my fear is that people are still very politicizing it. Certain political leaders are politicizing it. Eventually we'll still get there, but they're really sidelining a lot of people, especially in urban centers, especially in states like Massachusetts, California, that can really benefit from Bitcoin, benefit from these affordability crisis. But their leaders are telling them, this is just for, if you're a MAGA person, sure, or this is just for illicit, activity. This is just for criminals. That's what bothers me. That's why I'm doing a lot of the work I'm doing, because I want to tell these everyday people, I have benefited immensely from it as a nonprofit employee, as someone who was like, what do I invest in? How do I just preserve my money? I have benefited from it. You have benefited from it. I've seen people around the world incredibly benefit from it, like human rights activists, all of this stuff. And now we're seeing states benefit from it, right? So they're going to get there. I just don't want these people to be left behind because they've believed misinformation on it.
Yeah. Well, again, old guard. And, it was Warren's posture on Bitcoin particularly that really just turned me off to her and made it very frustrating that she was a leading voice on these issues for a long time, because it was completely antithetical to who I was as a Democrat in what I believed in. And I felt like it was a poor representation, to so many people about how they should be approaching these areas and this issue, this industry, and this technology. But yeah, man, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm with you on what you're talking about and why we think that, we need to keep having these conversations and kind of working through the challenges that we face in this space. But I do think it's dwindling. I think it is going to change. And it's just kind of like that old guard holding on to just tired no longer relevant narratives. And then at some point in time, especially with me talking about openly and being and being able to potentially be successful as the next governor of California, I mean, it'll flip. It'll 100% flip, and people will be talking about it in a different way. And so it's just about leaning into it and not being afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, I agree. And in the last few minutes we have here, I wanted to also get your take on a part of this conversation. How do we, so I think one of the leading conversations between kind of right and left and what's perceived as that or the politics of today is, we hear the term oligarchy all the time, right? It's almost annoyed me how much we hear it because I don't want it to become a buzzword because I think it does tap into a real thing that's happening in the US that's been happening, but it's been happening on steroids for a long time now, of very, very rich and elite continue to get very, very rich and continue to be able to play to a different set of rules than everyone else. So how do we detach conversations around technology? I mean, it's so many different things, but especially Bitcoin. How do we detach conversations if someone is on the left, if someone hears something like Bitcoin and then they only think Donald Trump, they only think super rich oligarchs, they only think all of these things. How do we detach that? And really, because my concern is that stuff like Bitcoin has been so entrenched with Wall Street recently. It is an open protocol. Anyone can access it. That's the beauty of it. That's why it can be resistance money for LGBTQ activists. That's why it can be resistance money for Planned Parenthood. That's why it can be resistance money for the state of California. But that also means that hedge funds on Wall Street and billionaires can buy it and hold it and use it for their own gains or whatever the case may be. So how do we continue to detach that narrative, focus on what Bitcoin can do for everyday people? Like you said, like what it did for your family. How can we focus on that and focus on things that are important? And lastly, attached to that, I'm curious your take from a governing perspective, what your approach would be, whether it's legislating or as governor, to things like self-custody, to the issues around taxation of Bitcoin, and your thoughts on a de minimis that I'm a big proponent of, in terms of you should be able to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin and not have to worry about paying a tax on that if you had an appreciated thing. So yeah, how do we detach that narrative? And then how do we legislate and lead on things that would really have Bitcoin benefit everyday people even more?
So we're in the same place on de minimis. We're in the same place, on all these issues that you just brought up. But it's by what we're doing now. People are going to continue to be skeptical if the leaders that they're listening to are skeptical, and so if we're talking about it and we're just they're broadening their horizons and opening the world of possibilities of what this technology can not just do for the state and for governments, but for them individually. I mean, that's huge. And you're right, it is open protocol and anybody can get involved. But right now, there's still enough hesitation that you could buy a coin or buy a fraction of a coin and use that to your advantage and just hold on to it. But we have to lower the temperature and the amount of fear that people have in doing so. I mean, it is intimidating, like signing up for a Coinbase account or a Gemini account. It takes a long time. And then you make this purchase, you think you're doing it well. And then you're like, oh, now I want to do it to cold storage. Well, how the fuck do I even do that? I mean, that's it's a scary thing. Like, you do your like little tests, where you're like, oh, this works. I don't want to mess this up. I mean, it's intimidating, but that's also the beauty of it, is that you're taking your power back. Like we're taking our power back. We're taking our freedom back. We're taking our security back. And there are barriers to entry to that. And for this, it's just about learning and being exposed to it and being able to kind of count on your leaders to not steer you away from it with fear, but say, hey, learn about this, understand this. There's only ever going to be 21 million. When you include the fact or count the fact that about 18 million, there's probably about 18 million coins that are actually ever going to be in circulation because of all the early coins that were lost and wallets that'll never be recovered ever again. Well, that's at some point in time, they're going to be all bought up and it's no longer exist. I mean, there were 40, 50 million millionaires in this country they all won't own one Bitcoin, but you could own one Bitcoin, or you can own a portion of a Bitcoin, a half of a Bitcoin. And over time, just sit on it. That's your savings. Wait for it. And there's going to come a time that's going to be valuable. But if we're constantly as leaders telling people that they should fear it, they're going to miss out on it. And all of that benefit is going to be controlled by the same people that control all the wealth today because anybody can buy it. And from day one, people can express their dissatisfaction with my opinion of this, but I never thought it was necessarily all that great for Bitcoin that Saylor has bought so much and that he holds so much. I feel like, in a lot of ways that could be detrimental for people to feeling like it actually is something that is more democratized and safe for them to put their bet in, because something happens with him and his business, or he decides this one day I'm out. Well, there could be a lot of harm in that. But over time, if you have individuals, like the value of it and the security of it is going to be in more individuals being able to hold it and hold on to it and have more, less volatility in the market. And that's how you're going to get there. And it can't be us as leaders telling people that they should fear it and that they should stay away from it. It's like, no, learn about it, get involved, and sit on it and just and wait for that moment for you to be able to take advantage of the benefits of it.
Yeah, and what you pulled on is the narrative issue, right? And that's what's troubling, is that it is a conservative and open protocol. The consensus rules are kind of set for Bitcoin. A lot of it is just kind of tweaks along the way as we go along. Like there's 21 million, it's proof of work mining, all of these things. We've done episodes so that people can check out previous episodes. We've done like Bitcoin 101 episodes, all of that stuff that people can tap into. I constantly post like book resources. And, another thing you talked about is people have to be willing to take personal responsibility as well. Like if they want to only, to own their Bitcoin, hold their private keys, that's a radically different view than having your money sit in a bank account, right? But again, I'm not one of those maxis to that extent. There are more services and resources than ever before, even more, definitely more than when you first got in, but even more than 2021, like wallets, apps, ETFs, right? If people want to have like retirement account and benefit from Bitcoin ownership and that, there's all sorts of varying opinions about that, right? And trade-offs, but there's more ways than ever to hold Bitcoin, to have access to it, to use it, to spend it. That's going to only increase. And it's also only going to increase if our political leaders take the time to understand it, do not legislate against it. That, in my opinion, would be legislating against constitutional rights and First Amendment rights and all of these things. So I am hopeful in that regard. And like you said, we got to keep these conversations going so that people can learn kind of the truth of these things and learn from themselves. Because also, when I first heard about Bitcoin, I kind of see different memes and things online or crypto and this and that. And I was like, that's not for me. Like I work in nonprofits. I'm like this social justice advocate. I work in anti-poverty work. That sounds definitely not for me. So it's okay to have that like, no, like Eric Trump, what's going on? Like, whatever, pick your boogeyman of choice, right? But don't dismiss it just because someone you don't like uses it or owns it. I think that's so incredibly silly.
Yeah. Oh, it's new. I get it's changed, but it's, we got to just lean into it, and we got to be able to, speak responsibly about it and make sure that we're, we give access to information. And so that's why, like, I was really excited when you reached out. I'm excited though, the work that you're doing, because this kind of helps break some of those barriers down, making people feel a little more confident and comfortable. Well, at some point in time, all the work that you've done, all the content that you've been able to put out there, it's going to become that much more relevant, because retail is going to be like, all right, we got to do this. Where can I learn about it? And you've got all these podcasts that are lined up and these discussions where people are like, okay, I get it. I see it. This is how I can do it. And, I want to protect my family, because nobody's going to care more about you than yourself. And nobody's going to be more motivated to protect you and your interests and your family's interests than yourself. And so that work is going to pay dividends, I think, one day. And so I'm glad that we got to have this conversation, and I hope we get to have more conversations like it.
Me as well. And I'm going to ask you one more question before I let you go, because it also, it's something I thought about as we were talking, and it's something that a lot of people get caught up on, and you alluded to it. Some Democratic leaders lump everything in together, right? Whether it's the Trump coin, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's Ethereum, and we are a Bitcoin only focus for many specific reasons. But I'm also not sitting here asking people to legislate or do harmful things against a maybe legitimate crypto project that I just don't believe in for money, for savings, the thing we focus on. So how do you approach the Bitcoin, not crypto? Like Bitcoin is not crypto, it is separate. How do you approach that when talking to politicians or when talking to everyday people? Because I think that's a big learning curve for people, is that Bitcoin is a separate thing from Trump coin. It is a separate thing from Dogecoin. And why that's important, because I think that puts a lot of people off as they see cryptos come and go. Bitcoin is lasting. It has many different properties than these other cryptos. So how do you talk about that? Also, from the perspective of a Democratic Party that values diversity and everything for very good reason, but sometimes you don't have to say all cryptos are equal in this way, because that's gotten folks in trouble in the past. Look at FTX and SBF, right? So how do you navigate that as a political leader, whether you're talking to friends about this or whether you're talking to other elected reps about this?
I mean, you always just got to be honest with what it is. I mean, there is, show me the Bitcoin CEO. There is no Bitcoin CEO. There will only ever be 21 million coins. It's a fixed supply. There's not going to be more. And so there's nothing like Bitcoin. It stands it stands alone. Whereas the other crypto projects, there could be value and there could be utility, but you could always increase the supply of the tokens. There's somebody that's, that can change that supply, that can make the decisions, And so, yes, there are different levels. There are the meme coins. There are the cryptos that are tokenized that actually have utility and value. And then there's Bitcoin. Bitcoin just stands alone. It's always stood alone. And it is, and it's very much intellectually honest to say that. I mean, that's not something that's debatable. But yeah, there are other projects out there. I mean, I've owned Ethereum, and I've owned Solana, and so I've also dabbled in these other tokenized cryptos. And I've even bought some meme coins. Like I bought Doge. That's probably the first one I bought because it was the easiest to do, and I was just trying to learn about it, and I was just curious. So ultimately, what I did is I liquidated all of those cryptos and put it all into Bitcoin. And so now what I hold is Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, it's just being honest with people so that they know what they are, why Bitcoin is different, and why it gets differentiated so many other times. But that there are other projects out there that are value, Ripple or XRP. Like, there are other tokens, and just take your time to learn about it. Feel confident and comfortable that why you're investing in it, and what its value is, and what its utility is. And as long as you feel comfortable, just you do it, but do so responsibly and with eyes wide open. And then from a government standpoint, just making sure that there are guardrails. And you said this earlier, and I couldn't agree more. Market structure is going to be a huge piece. Those are going to set the guardrails that is going to start that is going to build and cement the foundation of what this industry ends up looking like moving forward. And so these discussions are going to be big. If they're really important, they're going to have significant impacts with states and others, and how we legislate on our own around it, and how we message and talk about it to our constituents so that they feel confident and comfortable engaging in a way that they feel like is going to be beneficial to them, not harmful to them.
Well, Ian, that was a great final point to end on, because this is a refreshing conversation to have with a politician. I think if other political leaders or strategists or whoever are looking at this conversation, I think the one thing that Americans are yearning for from their elected officials, from their everyday life, is just authenticity and honesty, and just having that. And I think we did that in this conversation, just about what Bitcoin is and about why we care about these things, because that's the real point, right? I'm not here to worship the gold altar of Bitcoin. We're here to say it solved the problem. That's why we came here. That's why folks like me and you came into it, versus some of the, some people from Wall Street coming into it. There's some people that were already crypto traders coming into it, or, whatever the case may be, are already, into that kind of background. There's a lot of people coming in from, my side of nonprofit progressive stuff. And we want to make sure they feel like they have a home in this conversation, and in Bitcoin, because we think it's really important. So thank you for your time and having this conversation. Do you want to point anyone to any resources or things to learn more about you and the upcoming election?
Yeah. So my website is ianforgovernor.com. Check it out. They've got, we're going to keep building it out over the next couple of months and putting out our policy positions. You can follow me on X at Ian Calderon. And then I'm also on Instagram at ENC Calderon, and on TikTok at Ian for California 2026.
Awesome. And any other candidates that are running, you're more than welcome to come on this podcast to have these conversations. You don't have to know as much about Bitcoin as Ian does, clearly. If I'm not going to maybe have someone on to just kind of debate and have spread misinformation about Bitcoin. But if you're open to technology, open to thwe're an open format. So we'll be having more conversations with other politicians and elected officials because they are important to this conversation. They're very influential to possibly the future of what Bitcoin adoption looks like in this country. So I'm excited to do some of that and excited for our place in it. But thank you, Ian, again, for coming on the show. And we'll definitely have to do this again sometime soon.